Good afternoon. My name is Wesley Wallace, and I'm a student news journalist for Radford University's Tartan newspaper. Today, for our Police Relations in America panel, I am joined by Marc Morial, president of the National Urban League and author of his newest book, The Gumbo Coalition, 10 Leadership Lessons That Help You Inspire, Unite, and Achieve. I'm also joined by Pegues, a retired NYPD officer and the first African-American commander of the 67th Precinct in New York, and he's also the author of his 2016 self-titled memoir, Once a Cop, The Street, the Law, Two Worlds, One Man. Additionally, I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Theresa Beardall, an assistant professor of sociology and Indian studies at Virginia Tech University. Thank you all so much for being here and for participating in this discussion. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Wes.
So for the beginning of the discussion, I wanted to start off by talking about the recent events that's been going on in the midst of a global pandemic and with such a huge discussion around police reform and police brutality in our country. I wanted to start off by talking about George Floyd. For some of our students who aren't so familiar with the case, on May 25th, 2020, a 46-year-old Black man named George Floyd was murdered by a white police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after being accused of using a counterfeit $20 bill at a Cup Foods grocery store. The white officer by the name of Derek Chauvin put his knee on Floyd's neck, causing him to die of asphyxiation. Marc, I wanted to start with you. Last month on June 25th, or a couple months ago on June 25th, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the George Floyd Police Reform Bill, known as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. The bill, introduced by California Congresswoman Karen Bass, would make police officers liable for damages in lawsuits. It would ban no-knock warrants used by police officers in drug raids, and it would halt the flow of military surplus equipment to police departments. The bill would also implement a nationwide ban on chokeholds. It would reform qualified immunity for police officers and for law enforcement, and it would implement a national registry for police misconduct and make lynching a federal crime. President Trump has publicly said that he won't support any bill that hurts police and has threatened to veto the measure. If the bill doesn't get passed in the Senate, what alternatives should political officials use to enact effective police reform?
First of all, let me thank you, and I want to thank Radford University, and I want to thank the student newspaper for hosting this event today and for inviting me to participate. First of all, I am confident that if the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act were put to a vote on the floor of the Senate, that it would indeed pass. Now, maybe it's going to require the voters to weigh in November before there's a president who would sign the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill incorporates many of the Urban League's recommendations to the Congress over the years with respect to police reform and accountability. To help people understand this, what I would say is that over the years, police officers have been given, if you will, special protections against misconduct, official misconduct, not enjoyed by any other public employee or public official. So the protections afforded to a police officer when they violate the rights of a citizen, when they engage in a corrupt or brutal act, are beyond what a firefighter, beyond what a building inspector, beyond what a transit operator, beyond what a penal officer or any other public employee enjoys. And that system means that the long record is that too many officers who engage in misconduct, unconstitutional misconduct, acts of brutality, or even murder, in many instances face no accountability. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is meant to begin to change that. And the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act by itself is not enough, but it would be a vital change in federal law with respect to accountability of officers, both in the, if you will, state systems, or rather in the criminal system at the federal level and in the civil system at the federal level. And that's why I strongly support it. And I think anyone who would examine it would understand that it is a reasonable bill, and then it does a whole host of other things. Final thing I'll say, one element of the George Floyd bill that I particularly like is one that would accredit require police departments to receive national accreditation. We accredit hospitals, we accredit institutions of higher education, we accredit a wide range of things. That accreditation would mean that departments have to meet particular standards on use of force, for one, and a whole host of other areas in order to be eligible for any federal support.
And Marc, just to follow up with that question, I wanted to also follow up between the 1980s and 1990s. You were the former, during that time, the New Orleans Police Department was involved in a plethora of scandals involving murders, robberies, and even rapes. The New Orleans Police Department was also on the verge of being threatened with multiple civil action lawsuits from the U.S. Department of Justice for a continuous violation of civil rights. While serving as the New Orleans mayor from 1994 to 2002, you actually implemented a police civilian review task force to evaluate the creation of a citizen review board to consider complaints against police officers. Considering that police misconduct complaints against the Minnesota Police Department hit a record high in 2018, I wanted to get your thoughts on, do you believe a police civilian review task force would also help reduce misconduct within the police department?
So a police civilian review board, if it has teeth, if it has authority, if it's not simply window dressing, can play a role in holding police accountable. Some police civilian review boards have power. They have investigatory power, they have subpoena power, they have the power to make specific disciplinary recommendations. Others do not. They're highly advisory. They're more about transparency than anything else. So I would encourage people to understand that every civilian police review board is not the same. Where we ended up in New Orleans in the 1990s, on my watch, after I ran for mayor of New Orleans to clean up the department, and clean it up, we certainly did. I ran, and where we ended up is we put into place the Public Integrity Division. So we created a whole new division. That division actually operated outside of police headquarters at an independent location so that no one would be intimidated if they had to go there to file a complaint or go there to give a statement or go there for any other reason. And that unit played a strong role in our efforts in those days to really terminate some 50 to 70 officers. We cleaned out the department. We had to clean out the bad apples. We had to clean out the brutal and corrupt cops, and we did. And then start hiring according to new standards, new refreshed standards, new higher standards.
Corey, I wanted to get your thoughts on this discussion as well. Independent autopsy report conducted by George Floyd's family found that George actually died of mechanical asphyxiation. This means that George died due to neck and back compression that led to the lack of blood flow in his brain. Corey, as a former police officer, you know that police officers are trained that the restraint used by Derek Chauvin against George Floyd is inherently dangerous. Police officers are also trained to use reasonable force as well. Could you explain to our viewers what the necessary protocols are for officers to avoid the situation like the one used against George Floyd? And why do you think there's such a gray line when it pertains to reasonable force?
Yeah, again, thank you for having me on the show, on this podcast with such distinguished guests, and thanks to the university for having this very important discussion. So let me just be clear. In my 28 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like the George Floyd murder, and that was a murder. To have a man sit there and beg for his life, call his mother and everything else, anything just to live. It was really, really a black eye for law enforcement. I want to believe in my heart that the overwhelming majority of police officers in America would have gotten up off his neck, or a couple of the cops would have pushed him off because they would have saw that what they was doing was totally wrong. Now, police officers are only supposed to use the necessary force pertaining to the incident that they have. And they have non-lethal weapons such as mace, batons, physical force by using their fists, deadly physical force by using their firearms. And in none of these cases, all I saw with that case was probably some physical force to restrain him, which they did. He was already cuffed. And from my experience, when the cuffs is on, the game is over. So it should have never went that far. But that case is so unusual for us to compare because there's no other case like it that we've seen on video. I'm probably, Marc Morial, we could probably know that there were thousands of cases like this, but this is the only one that ended up on video. This is the one we saw. So this is the test case right now, because if dead men could talk, we probably got hundreds of thousands of Black and brown men that was killed by the police officer, executors, so on and so forth. But video has changed the game in America now. And that's why I'm pushing this Law Enforcement Bystander Act. And and Mr. Morial, hopefully you could push this also. I'm pushing that any police officers that's standing by when a crime is occurring, they should be terminated. No 2-week suspension, no, taking 3 days pay. If we can articulate by video or eyewitnesses that you stood by and watched another cop commit a crime and you didn't interfere, the Law Enforcement Bystander Act should be termination. And that should be on a federal level all around the country. And I don't think any politician would disagree with this. If you're very egregious and standing by and watching somebody get shot, maimed, paralyzed, or God forbid, killed, then you should be held accountable. If you have 1 week on the job, like some of those cops had out there in Minneapolis, and I have no pity for them, because when you swear to protect and serve by raising your hand, it doesn't say after 5 years, then we'll hold you accountable. The day that you put that badge and shield on and go out on the street, the public is assuming that you will be treating them with respect. And that's what we have to demand in policing. It's again, I got a house, 2 cars, and a white picket fence from policing. My daughter's a cop. My nephew's a detective in the NYPD. It's done very well for me and my family. And I'm for all good cops, but bad cops, we got to get rid of them. It's the only profession that has a spotlight on them, and rightfully so, because it's the only profession that you get the right to take a life. The citizens give you that right in the Constitution if deadly physical force is being used against you or someone else imminently. So it's a heavy responsibility, and the cops should have that right. But it's a heavy responsibility, so you got to make sure and ensure that you have the proper people out there patrolling the streets of the city of New York and around the country. Because if you're not fit for it, like I always say jokingly, McDonald's is always hiring.
Absolutely. And Dr. Beardall, I wanted to follow up with you on this. Police departments have a long history of violence and aggression toward many minority communities in the United States, including Latino, Muslim, LGBTQ, and Black Americans. Research shows that this creates a deep mistrust of police officers, and that has resulted in many minority communities already underusing police departments because they are reluctant to call them for help in many cases. According to my research I've conducted from the US Today, Latinos have some of the lowest reporting statistics in the United States. One of the biggest barriers in improving relations and avoiding civil rights violations in Latino communities is lack of good data. Local law enforcement agencies include race, but not ethnicity in arrest records. As an ethnographer, you've conducted research into race, policing, and police misconduct, and social inequality. How can police departments regain trust with minority communities, and what can the federal government do to combat this problem?
Thank you, Wes, and thank you to all of the guests and to Radford. So I just want to quickly back up and say that kind of broadly, the research that I do is I look at everyday acts of violence and injustice and degradation by police officers against people of color. And so oftentimes, rightfully so, we focus on officer-involved shootings, as we should. But every day there are thousands of Americans, particularly Black and brown people and Black and brown men, who are accosted and assaulted without warrant, unnecessarily, by police officers. And so what I study is what these everyday interactions do to this idea of trust and legitimacy, not just in police, but police really are the front line or the stand-in for government. And so oftentimes when our trust is eroded with police officers, we become fearful, reticent or hesitant to contact other agents of government for assistance. The data is a really important part of how all of these systems work. And I think that going back to your point about citizen review boards actually, Marc is absolutely correct. They need to have the teeth to do what they need to do. Regardless of kind of the style or the form in which that board was created, they do produce, oftentimes it's volunteers who produce some really incredible data on what these interactions look like and what everyday people in your city are experiencing. And those things, those reports, I've read thousands of these reports, if those things were taken very seriously by the mayor of the city, and in turn then the police chief and the department, I think there'd be a whole kind of different way of thinking about policing. One of the things that I would love to see, and this is just because I'm an academic, is I often ask police officers what they know about the racial and socioeconomic demographics of the areas that they police. And they tell me kind of off the cuff things like, oh, well, I think, that's a Black neighborhood and that's a poor neighborhood. But they don't seem to have a strong sense of who lives in a community, who works where, whether there are families living in a building or not. And I think having a sense of what a community is on behalf of officers is just as important as community members having an opportunity to build relationships with police. These things need to go two ways. Trust and legitimacy are built two ways.
And Core, I wanted to ask you this. Last month in July, the NYPD experienced a 400% surge of retirement applications from police officers. The New York Post actually spoke with some police officers who were retiring from their positions, who said that they were filing for retirement due to an increase of, quote, anti-cop sentiments and the passage of the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, which criminalizes the harmful use of a chokehold by a police officer. Given the country's national call for police reform and social justice, how do you think the NYPD will change in the next couple of years?
Well, so personally, when I saw such a mass exit of veterans, I was happy. Get them out of here. Go. You don't want to be here, go. Because we got thousands of Black and brown young men and women looking to get that $100,000 job a year, and they'll be willing to go to the communities and serve and protect with respect. So that's one piece. The NYPD has a problem right now. First, the mayor of New York, his whole administration is in shambles. His administration is in shambles. And there's been a turnover in the past 4 years. There's been 3 different police commissioners, which is usually not the case with a mayor. We have a mayor here on this panel. Usually a mayor might in his administration appoint 2.
I had 1.
Past 3. Right, exactly. That's
one.
usually the normal. That's usually normal. So leadership is top down in any administration, any governmental administration, any private administration. So when the leadership is not doing good, then you're going to end up having almost like the prisoners running the asylum. And that's what we have now, because it'll go back to in New York City when the cops turned their back on the mayor of New York City, which was unprecedented. And the police commissioner Bratton at the time allowed the police officers to do that. And so the unions are very strong out there. They listen more to the union officials than they do the police commissioner. If you have a weak police commissioner, then the union's going to run the department. And it's about time right now. Policing has been sitting on a high horse for years. About the past 20 years, we've had historic decreases in crime around the country, every state. Everybody been high-fiving the police. And right now it's a rocky time for the police. So they need to, in my estimation, just pull their big boy shorts up, deal with this right now. And now we need some systematic change. We have to root out the culture of going to Black and brown communities. What I always say is, and I can attest to it because I worked in all different communities, and Black and brown communities, police hunt, and white communities, they protect and serve. And I'm pretty sure that's around the country. So they got to stop hunting in our communities and start protecting and serving. Do we have criminals in our community? Yes. And I know in every community, usually, which surprise people, in white communities, Black police are not getting locked up. I mean, Black citizens, it's white people committing crimes in those communities. Black communities, black police, I mean, you know, black citizens are committing the crimes and so on and so forth. That's just the demographics of where you live. Usually people are committing crimes where they live. And so there's thousands of ways for police officers to bring crime down, especially with technology now and cops being more smarter. You know, they're sending police commanders to Harvard University. I graduated from Columbia University Police Management Institute. So I'm pretty sure there's innovative ways to bring crime down other than throwing people against the wall and disrespecting them. And what I'm seeing now around the country with cops pretty much laying down on their hands is a travesty. And I think the mayors and police commissioners need to really hire people that's going to help ensure that they bridge that gap between the community and the police, the black and brown community and the police.
Wes, can I ask Corey a quick question?
Yes, absolutely.
Corey, I'm wondering, in your experience, knowing that the majority of crime is nonviolent crime, and oftentimes it's driven by poverty in large part and other kind of socioeconomic factors, how do you think this moment of policing needs to respond to the fact that poverty is a real pressing problem in America? It drives a lot of the community level crime that our officers are often called to attend to.
So what I'm pushing again also is we need to free up cops to deal with crime, right? Mm-hmm. I like in Denver, they have this thing called a cohorts. Like cops are going to emotionally disturbed person's jobs and they have like an 8-hour block of training in 6 months for emotionally disturbed persons. So when cops get to the scene and like emotionally disturbed person, maybe somebody didn't take their medicine, they scream at the cop. Automatically, the cop is going right to their gun. Where you can get a trained professional that can calm a person down. So we need to get cops from those. You can't arrest your way out of drug addiction. Get cops out of that. We need to free up some of this money, what they call a defunding, which I label as restructuring policing. The way policing needs to look is to have the cops deal with like really the 7 major crimes: rape, robbery, you know, grand larceny, murder, homicide. Going to these other jobs like domestic violence, you know, we can send somebody over there. And if they need the cops, then we bring the cops if it gets violent. But having the cops have become the dumping ground for everything in America. I think we all can agree on that. And a cat in a tree, call the cops. Emotionally disturbed person, call a cop. Drug addict, wino on the corner, call the cops. So the cops in their defense have been overburdened. And by being overburdened, they have made it, you know, their mission to treat these crimes however they want to treat them, when we don't need the cops everywhere. Right. So the way I see crime and cops being utilized in the future is by freeing them up. And the cops, they get mad, oh, defunding, they're taking, no, it's not defunding. We don't need MP5s and tanks running through the city of Ferguson. You know, we don't need that. This is not Iraq. So we can take some of that money, we can reallocate a lot of that other money that's dealing with emotionally disturbed persons, drug addicts, and stuff like that, and free up the cops to just really deal with crime. Because again, in my experience, the gangsters of all gangsters, when they get shot at and robbed, they call the cops.
And Corey, it's interesting that you brought up the concept of defunding police, because that's actually what I was about to transition to next. Amid this time, there's also been a big discussion around the idea of defunding the police. Defund the police means reallocating or redirecting funding away from the police department to other government agencies funded by the local municipality. Just last month, the New York City Council cut $1 billion from the New York Police Department. This $1 billion in funds will go toward youth summer programs, family social services, and broadband expansion. Marc, I wanted to start with you and then Dr. Beardall. What are your thoughts on defunding the police? And do you think this can be a national reform as we head into the election in November?
Yeah, I like to look at it in terms of exactly the way you've described it and exactly the way your other guest described it. And that is policing has encroached, sometimes by public demand in certain neighborhoods, in areas where police officers are neither trained nor equipped to respond. Think of homelessness. Think of mental health. Think of nonviolent domestic disputes. We need a new system that focuses policing on violent offenses, focuses other arms of government on responding, crisis intervention units. Newark has something interesting. They have street teams. They have a team of people who are not armed, who respond, and many of them were formerly members of gangs, older brothers in the community, who go to places where a dispute may be fomenting to try to de-escalate the dispute. We need creative approaches. But the most important thing we have to recognize is we have redlined and underinvested in urban communities. Where's the commitment to the schools? Why is it that many of our high schools and middle schools and junior high schools do not have band rooms and high quality libraries and top of line technology, or extracurricular activities like newspapers and radio stations? Why is it that they don't have a full complement of sports and places for young people, boys and girls, to participate in sporting activities? Why is it that they don't have reading coaches and math coaches to assist teachers in these schools? Why is it that we don't have a comprehensive summer youth employment program that means that every young person who wants to work in the summer does have an opportunity to be employed? We've got to rethink the response that every problem of America's urban communities is more policing is what the defund police slogan is really all about. And I can say to you that my strategies and policies in New Orleans that really worked took the violent crime rate down by 60%, took the levels of corruption and brutality down to almost zero, were combined with an aggressive investment in youth programs, a huge and comprehensive summer youth employment program, an effort to create camps that were free and open pools for young people, the Louis Armstrong Jazz Camp and music programs, because New Orleans was a musical and a cultural town. We invested heavily in youth programs. It was one of my passions. It was one of the things we demanded. We invested public money. That is what we must do in America's urban communities. We have to invest in reentry, with thousands and thousands of people coming home every year after spending time behind the wall. These are the things. We need a whole different philosophy about America's urban communities that invests in hope, that invests in dreams, that invests in capabilities, that invests in talents. And all too often in the last 30 years, with the era of mass incarceration, with the era of crackdown policing, these policies have simply not worked. And because they've not worked, this is a time to pivot. This is a time to change. That change will not be easy. That change will not be automatic. That change will not happen simply at the national level. It's got to be led and assisted and, if you will, prompted by the national, at the national level, but city by city, county by county, village by village, neighborhood by neighborhood is where these changes certainly must take place. And let me say this is not an attack on policing, but no profession deserves to be unaccountable to the public interest. Police officers are public servants, like elected officials. Mm-hmm. Who would ever think that we have no right to criticize elected officials who are public servants? We have a responsibility and a right to call out wrongdoing by law enforcement and praise those things that go well also. And so I think we have to change this mindset that it's us against them, that you've either got to, raise the flag and congratulate all policing, or if you criticize policing, you're somehow anti-law. No, you're not anti-law enforcement. What we are for is for good law enforcement. I'll tell you a story. And this is a story about unions. When I was running, I appeared before the police union called the Police Association of New Orleans. At that time, very few of the Black officers on the New Orleans Police Department, even to this day, were members of that union. Black officers had their own organization called the Black Organization of Police. Me and my opponent happened to be a white lawyer. We were in the runoff election 4 days before the election took place. They called both of us before a mass meeting of all of their members, 600, 700, 800 people in a room. And they brought you in. And of course, I knew that the endorsement process was rigged for my opponent. I gave a talk, said what I was going to be about, and an officer raised his hand and said, I have one question for you, and a very sort of antagonistic. He says, I need to know if you're going to back us. I said to him, I will back you when you're right, and I will not back you when you're wrong. His response was, I don't need you when I'm right. I need you when I'm wrong. So one of the things we have to do is break down the culture of policing where officers feel there's peer pressure on them, and the system that's developed forces them to cover up wrongdoing by a partner, to look the other way, to never ever testify before a grand jury or in an investigation or in a trial against their partner, even when they witness brutality, wrongdoing, violation of policy, and even murder. That system, the blue code, the blue wall, however it's described, that has to be absolutely changed. So
right.
I like the suggestion earlier that places an affirmative responsibility to report wrongdoing to an authority and to step away from that kind of practice. That's going to be one of the essences of accountability. Would one expect, if we were all payroll clerks or cash administrators counting money, that I would have a responsibility to look the other way if I knew someone who was a coworker of mine was stealing money every night? Do I have a responsibility to never ever tell, to never ever say anything, even if I'm not part of it? Mm-hmm. See, we've got to change this mindset. In the military, there's a code of honor. There needs to be a code of honor amongst law enforcement. And what that code of honor needs to really be about is you have a responsibility to report wrongdoing, whether it takes place or is carried out by a citizen or even another police officer.
You know, Dr. Beardall, as we're having this conversation, a lot of it is not only educating others on why it's so important for police reform in this country, but as college students like myself, and I'm sure at Virginia Tech, it's important to have these conversations because as college students, we're agents of change. We protesting, whether we're uniting, we can create the change that we want to see in our country. I wanted to ask you, at teaching criminology at Virginia Tech, how have students been able to be involved in what you've been teaching at Virginia Tech, and how has the university supported your research efforts or your interests?
The university is incredibly supportive, and I'm sure every professor says this, but I love my students. They're bright, they are diligent, they're hard workers, and they're imaginative and creative. And they remind me, kind of as Marc is describing what New Orleans looked like under his leadership. One, I wish I lived there, and I wish we had that kind of mayoral leadership across the country. But the kinds of programs and projects that Marc listed are the exact things that I hear from young people every semester. We need parks, we need safe homes, we need safe schools, we need a job. My mom needs a job. We need to be trained to do a whole diverse set of jobs throughout our career, because this isn't, the 1950s anymore, and I know I'm going to have to be flexible with my life. Those things come out of the mouths of Virginia Tech students every semester. Normally I teach sociology of law first, and then we go into policing. And sociology of law is really about how all legal structures in the United States work, why we created them, and how they actually work together. Because it's surprising for a lot of young people when they realize that they know there's a mayor who has a police chief and there's a union somewhere because they saw it on the internet, but they're not sure who's making the decisions. They're not sure how city budgets are managed. So we often spend a lot of time going through budgets to understand who gets paid, what do they get paid, and what is the accountability on that payment. So that's one thing that we do in social law, and how we create the laws for accountability to make sure that there are structures underneath that those accountability laws actually align with. Because oftentimes we have mayors who say wonderful things like, I'm really going to buckle down on citizen oversight and we're really going to do it this time. But there isn't actually an infrastructure in place in the city or at the bargaining table with the police union to allow these things to happen. So students really, their eyes just kind of grow wide and they think, well, there's something we can do about it. So then we move into a policing course, which is what I teach this fall. So I teach social law in the spring, policing in the fall. Normally we don't start in police abolition. This semester, I think it's important that we do. So I restructured the course. So we start in abolition, because one of the things that I continue to realize with young people is you all want to know what's going on right now. You want a safe, affirmative environment. You want thoughtful readings to be able to really pick apart what these kind of hot topics are and how you make sense of them within your undergraduate training. So that's something that we're doing this semester, starting in abolition. We go through a traditional crim approach on what is policing, like textbook policing. Then we go into a sociological perspective on, what does this actually mean? What is law and order? Who created the law, and what is order and what is disorder? And how are our biases prone for all of us, not just police officers, to have us identify areas of society that seem problematic to us because of our own biases. And then we transition those things into working for some municipality. So my students then do a set of research projects for a city council. We haven't decided which one. We're talking to 3 right now, where they take all of these things they've learned across the year and they create a set of white papers based on what's happening in that city right now. And so these are the sorts of things that young people want. And I mean, I know a lot of faculty say, I wish my students read more, and I don't seem to have a problem with that. Young people want to build the world that Marc described, and they're energetic, and I couldn't be more excited for them to take ownership in the world that we have now.
And Corey, I wanted to ask you, when we look at the George Floyd case, particularly with the officer Derek Chauvin, the officer who put his knee on George's neck, during his time as a police officer, he's had many misconduct complaints filed against him. 15 actually complaints filed against him. And when it pertains to the other officers involved in George Floyd's death, they had just entered the force in less than a couple of days. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think the screening process for police officers is so lenient, or why do you think it's not rigorous enough so that these kind of situations don't happen?
Well, again, so you got to understand, other than New York, Chicago, LA, Detroit, like some of the big police departments, most of the police departments around the country don't have so many police officers, maybe 800 or 1,000 or less. NYPD at 40,000, LA with 15,000, Chicago 8, 9. So a lot of these small town policing, there's a lot of, what I call a good old boy network, cousins, uncles, next door neighbors. When you look at them, they're 3rd, 4th, 5th generations that's getting the jobs. And, everybody else is trying to get it, but they can't get it. And you like, how does Chauvin get the job? So as far as the complaints go, most in police departments, again, it's a paramilitary organization, meaning it's not the military, but it's one step down. And so with military, its leadership is top down. Most people, and my master's is in criminal justice leadership, but most leaders want to be liked. It's just like every job you have, you want to go to work and be liked. Unfortunately for me, for 21 years, nobody liked me because I actually did the job the way the job was supposed to be done. So when cops get complaints, most commanders are not really trying to put a spotlight on it because they feel as if it's, a strike against them. But for the life of me, I look at Chauvin's jacket. He had 18 years on the job. He was involved in 3 shootings when 99% of cops around America don't have one shooting in 20
Don't have
years.
one, right.
This guy had 3 within
Rare.
18 years. And I have to say this, people have to know that the new police commissioner out there, the chief, he's a black chief. And I'm not taking him off the hot seat. He was there for 4 months. And I don't know how in the hell that he allowed a guy with 18 years on the job, involved in 3 police shootings, 1 shooting, he killed somebody, to end up being a training officer for rookies. There's no way in the world. If I was to take over a police department, one of the first things I'm gonna do within the first 3 days is call the chief of internal affairs into my office and say, give me a breakdown of everybody that got complaints. Let's go through them now. Obviously, if it's the NYPD, it's gonna take you probably a year. But a department with like 800 people, it's not gonna take you long to go through it. And so Chauvin would have been a bright light. Like, why is this guy out? He's the training officer. No. We need to put him by the telephone, and I need to talk to the corporation counsel to figure out how we could terminate this guy, because he doesn't need to be out on the street. But that's leadership. And my 2 panelists will tell you, especially the mayor, everybody is not built to be a leader, just like everybody's not built to be a cop, and everybody's not built to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so leadership is the key to success, especially in a paramilitary organization. Because if you're not going to change from the top, then the information is never going to get down to the bottom that we're looking to make change. And middle management, that middle piece is the most important piece. So if you got a leader that's really willing to make change, that information needs to go top down. And if you have a middleman that's messing up your program, you need to take him or her out. And so you send a message to the entire department that, hey, this person at the top is not playing. In 1993, I was a cop. Bill Bratton, and I'm not a huge fan of him, but I'm telling you, he came to the NYPD and he walked into the 30th precinct and he arrested 30 cops in the middle of the night. He took all of their shields from them. It was a corrupt precinct, and threw them in the garbage. And it reverberated through the police department. We was like, whoa, this guy's not playing. Because what happens with police officers, when you know that you can't pay your mortgage at the end of the month, you're not gonna do anything to go embarrass your family or yourself. And so when you have leaders that come through the door kicking and screaming and saying, hey, you better change, or you better change now, it reverberates. And that's what we need all around the country.
Let me add one other thing, and then I'm going to have to excuse myself, but I agree with everything you say, and it's been great listening to you and your observations, and as well as the professors. Derek Chauvin, the officer in Minneapolis, 2 weeks ago was indicted on tax evasion. Mm-hmm. For the last 5 years, he has earned almost $500,000 moonlighting at nightclubs. This process of moonlighting, which doesn't occur at an NYPD, but in many smaller departments, is a significant abuse. So what it means is that the badge and the gun he has more value than his salary. It has a value because it enables him to earn money on the side. This was a dirty officer engaging in brutal acts, killing people, shooting his gun, racking up complaints. Some kind of way he finagles himself to be the training officer. And then he's a corrupt officer, a corrupt officer who doesn't pay his taxes and had a summer home someplace down in Florida. See, this is the kind of activity. So I think departments have to curtail these moonlighting opportunities because it allows people. In New Orleans, we cut it back so that you could not do any moonlighting wherever there was an ABO establishment, wherever alcohol was being sold. And we cut it back to put a limitation on the number of hours. And then you had to have departmental approval in advance. So if you ask for approval at an establishment or at a place or at a person that had a criminal history or some well-known problems, that moonlighting detail opportunity would be disapproved. We also changed it because you had a situation, because New Orleans is a special event city, where you had an officer who may have been a sergeant who had a relationship with a movie production company. And when the movie came to town to do a shoot, that sergeant could assemble a team of 30 officers and some of the officers working for him would be his supervisor. And so you can imagine the corruption and the problems this had. So the superintendent took the responsibility that he would determine on a multi-officer detail, if you will, who in fact would be the command of that. And he used higher ranking officers in order to do that. So we could have knocked the whole system out, right? Knocked the whole system out, but we chose to put some controls on it. Now, I don't know if those controls, lasted beyond my tenure, because the New Orleans Police Department went into reverse when I left office and when my chief left office, because my successor as mayor himself ended up in the federal penitentiary. So he was part of the municipal corruption cycle that occurred in the city. And he allowed the department to revert backwards because he did not have a commitment. So one of the things that's interesting is you need mayors who are committed, you need chiefs who are committed, but you need a citizenry, right, that is engaged and wants to hold a department accountable 24/7. It's simply that important. So it's great to be with both of you all today. Let me just lift up the students at Radford University for a very engaging discussion. And if there's anything else I can do, let me know, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Dr. Beardall and Core, I wanted to ask you, as we approach November for the upcoming election, I wanted to get your thoughts on what role does criminal reform play in voters, young millennials particularly, but also American voters, and how do you see that playing out, and how do you see criminal reform intertwining in the upcoming presidential election? Dr. Beardall, I'll start with you.
I'm gonna reverse just 1 minute to highlight some of the things that Corey and Marc were talking about, and thinking about how important it is. They've listed for us a set of really important cultural shifts that need to happen in police departments. And I just want to emphasize that many of the things that we've been talking about are included in the labor contract for police. And this is another way or reason or entry point in which police unions become very pivotal to this conversation. So the duty of care and the requirement to intervene when, as an officer, when you see that something is, not going right, or someone is, hurting a citizen or stealing money, whatever it is, that can be put into the labor contract. So if we want it to happen, the mayor could, have their bargaining team press it as an issue. And that really hasn't happened in the way that it should across America. That's one thing. The moonlighting / overtime, outside of traditional policing, that's also a labor issue that can go into the labor contract. If we don't want officers, oftentimes they say, well, I'm working 80 hours a week. And it's like, well, you're actually working 34 for the city, and all the other hours are moonlighting hours. So if we didn't want that to happen, they say, I'm under a lot of stress, that's why it happened. Well, we're not really paying you to go do the moonlighting. We're paying you to protect and serve the taxpayers who pay your salary and who pay your mortgage. And that's something that can go into the labor contract. The third thing is how Chauvin got to be the training officer. Sadly, throughout my research, this is not at all surprising to me. It's alarming, but it's not surprising, because in many labor contracts across the United States, disciplinary records cannot be used in consideration of promotion or the opportunity or potential for promotion. So if I did 17 awful things, you all, as the promotion board, you cannot consider those things when deciding whether or not I get promoted from sergeant or lieutenant, or whether or not I get to become the training officer. All of these things are labor issues. They're kind of the nitty-gritty labor law side of what we want policing to look like. So as we have leadership create a set of cultural reforms, they have to be aligned with the legal reforms. And the legal reforms really require police chiefs and commissioners and union presidents to really get on board, but they also require mayors to take a much stronger role in bargaining for these things, and city councilors, who often are the ones who are approving and creating city budgets. So remembering that municipality budgets, what does that money come from? That comes from the taxpayers. That comes from the residents of a community, right? And so if we want all of our public servants to be serving those who pay their mortgage, we need to make sure our mayors and our city councilors are doing a really good job of bargaining for our protection. Of course, we want, police to be safe and well paid and respected, absolutely, but not at the expense of, the ability for citizens to feel safe in their community. So I just want to kind of highlight how these two things work together, the cultural shifts along with the legal shifts. And so when I think about the upcoming election this year, I think about, in my mind, and this is just because this is what I think about and study all the time, I think the average police union contract in America is 3 years long. That's it. So every mayor has an opportunity to change these conditions of employment to protect community members. So I'm going to be down at City Hall. In addition to voting for the national elections and for, my state reps, I am going to take a really strong, active role in my local politics, and the mayor is going to know exactly where I stand on all of these issues. And my mayor does, because I have an itemized list that, I work with communities and I send it to the mayor and my city councilors. And we need transparency on that money. If and when people realize in most mid-sized cities that half of all of the entire city budget goes to policing, they fall out of their chair. How is it possible that their kids don't have books, but half of the city's budget go to police? And again, I just want to emphasize what Marc said earlier, and I think Corey said it too. This isn't anti-policing. This is pro-people. This is pro-all of us, right? Police are an important part of society, but they're one member among many important parts of society. So the 2020 election is super important, especially on issues of criminal justice reform at a structural level, but locally, we have this opportunity to go get into our mayor's office right now and to email and get on the phone with our city councilor and say, I need to know where you stand on these issues of policing. Do our officers have a duty of care? Do they need to intervene when someone does something wrong? Are our officers using their badge to go get, $80,000 in overtime? Because some officers do this. And so they're high stressed when they come to police in our community and they don't really want to have anything to do with us. Or are we promoting people who have drawn their gun unnecessarily on, citizens of this community? I need that part of the contract changed. And those are some things that we can do really immediately. And mayors are afraid of this, and so are city councilors, because they have hid behind this curtain of, I just deal with the police chief, or I make decisions and they do what they need to do. You also create the budget, and you are the one who signs the labor contract. So at the end of the day, this is about police, but this is also about our mayors and our city councilors. And those elections are ongoing all the time. And these are the questions we need to ask people who want to become our city councilor or who want to become our mayor. Where do you stand on these particular labor issues? Because they're labor issues, right? Teachers can't do this. We talked about this earlier. Other public servants can't do it. And it is not anti-police. We need to make sure we're all being taken care of and we're all being protected and supported. So I'll give the 2020 over to Corey, I think.
Yeah. Well, you made some great points. And listen, all politics are local. I tell people that all the time. All politics are local. I live in a small town. My police department is 50 cops. I know the police commissioner. I know the mayor. I know all of the trustees. I vote at every school board election. Like, I'm not just the presidential election. So that's a whole nother conversation, Wes. We need a whole nother conversation about that, but she knocked it out the ballpark with the points that she made. The 2020 election, criminal justice reform is definitely heavy on the ticket. It's big. And I'm a Democrat. I've always voted Democratic. I will be voting for Biden and Harris ticket. And one thing I did like about Donald Trump, our president, is when he was running, if you remember, he gave a list of 25 judges and said, if I get elected president, this is the list that I will choose from. And I thought that was so ingenious. And so what I've been telling people, we should be doing that on a local level. Absolutely. If a mayor is running, we should be asking the mayor in the Black and brown community, give me a list of 3 people who you consider in the point for police commissioner or police chief. You don't have to name them, but give us those 3. So now we can make a decision if we're going to vote for you. Because like Joe Biden, give us the 5 people you considering for Attorney General, because look what Trump, he puts, look at the track record. Sessions, who's a racist, Barr, who's a racist, so on and so forth. Like, if you're not voting people in that have your best interest or your community's interest, you're going to get a Jeff Sessions and so on and so forth. So locally and on the national level, we need to start holding people feet to the fire. Give us the names of the people who you are considering. Like I said, I'm not a Trump fan. What he did with the judges, I thought it was ingenious. And it's like, whoa, moving forward, everybody should be doing this. That's something that we can use locally and have everybody say, hey, this is who I'm considering. And if you choose outside of that list, you know that you're only going to have one term, because you made that promise and commitment that these are the people you will choose from. And we, you know, I said, hey, I like these picks. Even one of these are good for my community. And if you deter from that list, you won't get my vote, or the 1,000 or 15,000 people who I'm gonna be knocking on their doors telling them not to vote for you. But the 2020 election, criminal justice is definitely high on the ticket. Again, I don't even really think, I mean, Curious George probably could win this election here with what's going on in the country, but this election is going to be very important, and criminal justice reform is definitely on the ticket.
And I would add that kind of what Corey is speaking to is pushing for an issue item agenda rather than a party agenda. I'm always going to vote left, but I need to know exactly what your agenda is. I need to know how you're spending, you know, my neighbor's money. I need to know you know, I'm paying my taxes for the school district, and I need to know, are you employing 95% of teachers who don't live here and don't pay taxes in the city and don't want to be a part of the community? I need to know all of these things. And what that requires is an issue-driven ticket, right? Where we say we understand the two-party system and all the problems with it. We understand personalities really dominate, but behind the personality, what is it that you intend to do with our time and our money and our community? And we need some transparency and accountability. I want a website that goes up, and I want a scorecard. And I want the mayor, the state rep, the senator, the president, I want them to keep a running tally of whether or not they have done the things with our time and our money, and really our kids, because it's our kids that this world, you know, goes to. I want to know how well they're doing on the things that they promised. I am less interested in, you know, what kind of music they like, although I do love Obama's playlists that he still puts out in his book list, which are fabulous, and I love that part about them. But I would have loved him without it had he also had this sort of agenda, right? And so we need to be real critical about, we're in a pandemic that should have never happened. We should never be, you know, forcing young people to live in this kind of world, where there's a CDC report that came out recently that says that 25% of all college students who were surveyed said that they have considered suicide during the pandemic and or have started to rely on drugs, alcohol, and other kind of substances to kind of ease the anxiety of what this moment is taking on them. I think as adults, we need to be, as older adults, we need to be really responsible to what young people are telling us and what they're not telling us, and about the world that we give them. And the world that we give them is transparency, accountability, and people first.
Well, Dr. Beardall and Corey Pegues, thank you so much for being a part of this discussion and speaking with the Tartan. The paper really appreciates it, and we appreciate all your insight. So thank you so much for your time.
And thank you to everyone at
Thank you
Radford.
for having me.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
Go
too.
Radford.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Theresa, you too. All right. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.